Pocket up ahead. Come on, let's go, you guys.
Nearly 3 years after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the island of Guam, a U.S. territory in the Pacific, remained under the harsh occupation of the Imperial Japanese Army. The largest island of the Mariana Chain, Guam had been under American administration since 1898, but it fell to Japan within days of the Pearl Harbor assault in December 1941. By the summer of 1944, the tide of war had turned decisively in favor of the Allies. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, launched Operation Forager, a massive campaign to retake the Mariana Islands, including Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. The goal was not only to push closer to Japan, but also to reclaim American soil lost in the early days of the war, a powerful symbol that the United States was now on the offensive. Strategically, Guam was invaluable. Its large landmass, deep water harbor at Apra, and 2 airfields made it an ideal base for the new B-29 Superfortress long-range bombers. From Guam, the U.S. could launch direct attacks on the Philippines, Taiwan, and even the Ryukyu Islands. The initial plan called for the Guam landing to take place just 3 days after the fall of Saipan in mid-June 1944. But the fierce Japanese resistance on Saipan, combined with the massive Battle of the Philippine Sea, forced the Americans to delay their assault by more than a month. The U.S. used this extra time to prepare thoroughly, unleashing weeks of naval bombardments and air raids to soften up the island's defenses. Starting on July 8, 1944, American carrier aircraft and warships rained destruction on Guam. For 13 consecutive days and nights, thousands of tons of bombs and shells pounded Japanese strongholds across Hagåtña, Asan, Agat, Sumay, and the strategic Orote Peninsula. Smoke and fire blanketed the island. Villages were leveled, forests burned, and concrete bunkers shattered under relentless fire. Meanwhile, under cover of darkness, U.S. Navy underwater demolition teams risked their lives approaching the beaches. Between July 14th and 16th, they cleared over 900 obstacles and mines embedded along the coral reefs, paving the way for the massive amphibious armada waiting just beyond the horizon. The liberation of Guam was imminent. At dawn on July 21st, 1944, the U.S. Navy began its final bombardment of Guam, the day officially designated by the Americans as W-Day. Starting at 5:30 a.m., the guns of the fleet thundered to life, unleashing a torrent of shells onto Japanese coastal defenses in preparation for one of the largest amphibious assaults of the Pacific War. Far offshore, stretching from beyond the coral reefs to the horizon, hundreds of American warships and transport vessels formed an unbroken line. On board were more than 50,000 U.S. Marines and Army troops, ready to reclaim the island that had once been theirs. At exactly 8:30 a.m., the invasion began. According to plan, American forces landed on 2 beaches along Guam's western coast, forming a double pincer maneuver aimed at cutting off the Orote Peninsula, home to the island's key airfield and naval base. In the north, the 3rd Marine Division, commanded by Major General Alan Turnage, stormed ashore at Asan Beach, just north of Hagåtña. Meanwhile, in the south, the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade, under Brigadier General Lemuel Shepard, came ashore near Agate Village, creating the second prong of the assault. Following the Marines, the 77th Infantry Division of the U.S. Army, led by Major General Andrew Bruce, landed to strengthen the beachheads and secure the rear areas. But as soon as the naval guns fell silent, the Japanese opened fire with devastating ferocity. From the cliffs overlooking Asan, enemy machine guns and mortars rained bullets and shells onto the beachhead. Within minutes, the Marines were pinned down under a storm of fire. Despite heavy losses, The assault troops of the 3rd Marine Division pushed forward, breaching the 1st Japanese defensive line. Sherman tanks from the 3rd Tank Battalion were hastily brought ashore to support the infantry, while flamethrower teams burned out pillboxes hidden in caves and rocky slopes. After nearly an hour of chaotic fighting, the Marines seized several commanding heights, including Chonito Ridge, a key stronghold of the Japanese defense. The cost, however, was steep. More than 200 Marines were killed or wounded on the first morning alone, among them several company commanders who fell while leading their men through the fire. In the south at Agat, the battle was just as brutal. A broad coral reef stranded many amphibious tractors, Amtraks, far from shore, forcing Marines to wade in under relentless enemy fire. Japanese troops of the 38th Regiment, using a network of caves and jungle ridges, had survived the naval bombardment and now unleashed a vicious counterattack. Machine guns and mortars pounded the yellow and white beaches, inflicting heavy casualties. Still, the 22nd Marine Regiment pressed forward as planned, aided by DUKW amphibious trucks carrying Sherman tanks, which blasted through Japanese pillboxes and cleared the way into Agate Village. By about 1 p.m., the Marines had secured the village, though the southern beachhead remained precarious. On the left flank, the 4th Marine Regiment ran into unexpected resistance from a hill not marked on the maps, where 2nd Battalion/4th Marines was held up for hours. Only after reinforcements landed and attacked from the rear were the defenders finally driven off. Around midday, General Lemuel Shepard himself came ashore at Agate to take personal command, ordering his men to dig in immediately and prepare for the inevitable night counterattack. That night, the first after the landings, thousands of American troops across both the Asan and Agate beachheads waited tensely in their foxholes. They knew what was coming, the suicidal Japanese counter-assaults that every veteran of the Pacific had heard about. And now, they would face them for real. Just as the Americans had anticipated, the Japanese launched fierce counterattacks as soon as night fell over Guam. On the southern front, Colonel Takeshi Suenaga, commander of the Japanese 38th Regiment, rallied his remaining men for a desperate, suicidal banzai attack aimed at driving the Americans back into the sea. Before the assault, Suenaga ordered the regimental flag burned as a symbol of no surrender, then distributed the last of the sake and beer to his troops to steel their resolve for death. Near midnight on July 21st, Japanese soldiers crept toward the American lines under the cover of darkness. Moments later, waves of mortar shells crashed down on the right flank of the 4th Marine Regiment. Hundreds of Japanese troops charged wildly through the darkness, supported by Type 95 Heigo light tanks rumbling toward the marine defenses of 3rd Battalion/4th Marines. The Americans held their ground. Bazookas and Sherman tank guns lit up the night, destroying multiple enemy tanks and breaking the first assault wave. At 3:30 a.m. on July 22nd, Suenaga personally led a second attack, only to be struck by mortar fragments and fatally shot by an American rifleman as he charged the front line. Naval star shells illuminated the battlefield, revealing scores of Japanese soldiers charging across open ground in suicidal waves and dying one after another under the blazing fire of Marine machine guns. By dawn, the field before the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade was strewn with bodies. Over 400 dead counted near one battalion's line, and nearly 200 more in front of another. The first night's counterattack had ended in catastrophe. The elite 38th Regiment was effectively wiped out. Meanwhile, on the northern beachhead at Asan, Japanese forces carried out several smaller infiltration raids against the 3rd Marine Division, but all were repelled. Their artillery and mortars harassed the Marines throughout the night, and one Japanese squad even slipped through a gap between American regiments in an attempt to attack division headquarters, but was detected and destroyed. By dawn, the Japanese had suffered heavy losses for no gain, while the Americans held firm and prepared to go on the offensive. Over the next 3 days, July 22nd to 24th, U.S. forces strengthened their beachheads and began cautious advances inland to link the northern and southern flanks. Fighting was savage in the jungle-covered hills of central Guam. Every ridge, ravine, and rocky outcrop became a killing ground as Marines fought hand-to-hand to root out entrenched defenders. Within the first 4 days, the 1st Marine Brigade suffered over 1,000 casualties, including 188 dead, forcing commanders to rotate units and request reinforcements to maintain the pressure. On July 23rd, the 3rd Marine Division launched an assault on Bunshu Ridge, a heavily fortified Japanese stronghold on the right flank, supported by artillery and airstrikes. The Marines advanced slowly but steadily, discovering that some enemy positions had been abandoned overnight. By July 24th, the 3rd and 21st Marine Regiments had captured part of the Fonte Plateau in central Guam, while farther south, the 9th Marines attempted to cross the Aguada River to link up with the 1st Marine Brigade, though without success. Even so, the Americans could sense the tide turning. Japanese resistance was faltering. Many defensive positions lay deserted, littered with bodies of fallen soldiers, abandoned weapons, and untouched stockpiles of food and ammunition deep in the jungle. Guam was bleeding, and the battle for its liberation was entering its decisive phase. On July 25, 1944, after nearly a week of relentless combat, American forces temporarily slowed their advance to regroup and resupply. Anti-aircraft artillery battalions, Navy Seabees, and convoys carrying fresh water, food, and ammunition were brought ashore to sustain the frontline troops. On the ground, Brigadier General Lemuel Shepard, commanding the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade, steadily tightened his grip around the Orote Peninsula, overrunning one bunker after another to cut off escape routes for the roughly 2,500 Japanese troops trapped there. Opposing them were Japanese naval infantry from the 54th Defense Unit, commanded by Captain Tamai Asaichi. In a series of tank clashes, nearly all of Japan's Type 95 Heigo light tanks, armed with 47mm guns, were destroyed by American Sherman tanks. 8 were knocked out in a single day. Cornered and with no hope of reinforcement, Captain Tamai resolved to launch a final Banzai suicide charge on the night of July 25th, hoping to break through the American encirclement and rejoin the main forces under General Takeshi Takashina. Before the assault, Tamai ordered all ammunition and reserve weapons distributed, then broke open the stores of beer, sake, and whiskey, urging his men to drink deeply and prepare to die. Meanwhile, in the island's central sector, General Takashina, overall commander of Japanese forces on Guam, received a cable from Tokyo. "You must hold Guam to the end. Reinforcements are on the way." Though he knew the promise of reinforcements was a fantasy, Takashina chose to obey. He organized a massive counteroffensive for the night of July 25th to 26th, timed to coincide with Tamai's suicidal breakout. Roughly 10,000 troops, remnants of the 18th Regiment and the 48th Independent Mixed Brigade, were assembled on the Fonte Plateau. Their plan, to break through between the U.S. 9th and 21st Marine Regiments, drive all the way to Red Beach 2 at Assam, and shatter the Marine defensive line, cutting off the 3rd Marine Division and relieving the trapped Japanese at Orote. As the monsoon rain began to fall, the decisive battle for Guam's fate was about to begin. That night, torrential rain drenched the ruined palm groves of Guam. In their flooded foxholes, the Marines gripped their rifles, straining their eyes into the pitch-black darkness. Suddenly, from the direction of Orote, hundreds of white-clad figures emerged, shouting and firing wildly as they charged the 1st Marine Brigade's line. It was Captain Tamai's desperate breakout attempt. But the pre-battle drinking spree had doomed his men. Under the glare of American illumination flares, their white uniforms gleamed like targets in the night. U.S. artillery and machine guns cut them down mercilessly. Whole formations collapsed under the crossfire. Some panicked and fled into the swamps, others stumbled back into the jungle. Still, Tamai, wounded but alive, regrouped the survivors for a second charge, hurling them once more into the inferno. Again, they were met by an impenetrable wall of gunfire. Later, the Marines would call it the Mariana Turkey Shoot on land, a one-sided slaughter. By dawn on July 26th, more than 400 Japanese bodies lay piled before the 1st Marine Brigade's line, with 600 wounded groaning in the mud, while the Americans had lost only around 75 men. The Japanese garrison at Orote had been annihilated. At the same time, in the north, thousands of Japanese troops poured down from the Fonte Plateau around midnight, striking at the 3rd Marine Division's defenses. Through the downpour and darkness, the Marines fought back with iron discipline and deadly accuracy. In some sectors, a company of just 250 men was forced to hold a front nearly 2 kilometers wide, a line that would normally require at least 600. Realizing how critical the situation was, Major General Roy Geiger, commander of the 3rd Amphibious Corps, ordered every available rear echelon soldier, engineers, drivers, mechanics, even clerks, to grab rifles and rush to the front. The Japanese, benefiting from sheer numbers, managed to breach several trenches. One group slipped between the 9th and 21st Marines, reaching the 3rd Division command post. In the chaos, staff officers, radio operators, and truck drivers seized weapons to defend the headquarters, determined not to let the command flag or codebooks fall into enemy hands. At the forward surgical station, wounded Marines tore off their bandages and crawled to the entrances of bunkers, firing pistols at the infiltrators. The fighting raged through the night in blinding rain. Many Japanese soldiers, drunk and leaderless, fought like men already dead. Some even knelt down, placed a live grenade on their heads, pulled the pin, and waited for Marines to approach, choosing to die in mutual destruction. The island of Guam, shrouded in lightning and gunfire, had become a place where life and death blurred into one, a storm of fire, rain, and madness. As dawn broke on July 26, 1944, the gunfire over Guam gradually faded into silence. Across the Central Front, Japan's massive suicide assault had ended in disaster. Bodies of Japanese soldiers littered the hills and valleys before the American lines. Over 3,500 dead were counted as the sun rose. Major General Takeshi Takashina, who had personally commanded the attack, had lost nearly 4,000 men in a single night. 95% of his officers were dead or wounded, and over 90% of his heavy weapons destroyed. The Americans also suffered casualties, but far fewer, 166 killed and 645 wounded between July 25th and 27th. Realizing there was no longer any hope of driving the invaders into the sea, General Takashina ordered the remnants of his forces to withdraw from southern Guam and fall back into the northern jungles, where they would attempt to hold out and delay the Americans, though he knew full well no reinforcements would ever come. While overseeing this desperate retreat on the Fonte Plateau, Takashina was killed by American machine gun fire on July 28, 1944. After his death, command of the remaining Japanese forces passed to Lieutenant General Hideyoshi Obata, commander of the 31st Army, who had already been trapped on Guam for weeks, and who now resolved to fight to the death. The night of July 25th to 26th had sealed Guam's fate. The Japanese had lost nearly all their elite troops and were forced to abandon the western coast, retreating into the dense interior. The Americans seized the moment, launching a full-scale counteroffensive on all fronts. On the morning of July 26th, from the southern beachhead, the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade began a massive assault on the Orote Peninsula, the last major Japanese stronghold in the south. Under intense bombardment from naval guns and field artillery, the 22nd Marine Regiment advanced along the Agatsume Road from the east, while the 4th Marines attacked from the west. Japanese troops fought fiercely from bunkers and caves, but were gradually crushed by Sherman tanks and relentless artillery fire. On the night of July 27th, scattered survivors attempted a final suicidal counterattack, but their morale was broken. Many dropped their weapons and fled into the jungle. By July 28th, the Americans had secured the Orote Peninsula, recapturing the airfield, harbor, and ruins of the old U.S. naval base at Sume. That same day, the northern and southern beachheads linked up at the foot of Mount Tenjo, forming a continuous 15-kilometer front along Guam's western coast. At the newly recaptured Orote base, the 1st Marine Brigade held a ceremonial flag raising amid the ruins. The stars and stripes once again flew over Guam, the first time in nearly 3 years of Japanese occupation. The ceremony was attended by senior U.S. commanders, including Vice Admiral Raymond Spruance, Lieutenant General Holland Smith, Major General Roy Geiger, and Brigadier General Lemuel Shepard, while 2nd Battalion, 22nd Marines had the honor of planting the flag. After consolidating the South, General Geiger deployed the 77th Infantry Division, U.S. Army, to join the Marines in sweeping the remainder of the island. Only 5,000 to 6,000 Japanese troops remained, starving, exhausted, and nearly out of ammunition. They entrenched themselves in the northern mountains and jungles, setting ambushes to slow the American advance. In early August 1944, Guam's tropical monsoon season began, and torrential rain turned the island into mud. American troops slogged through swamps and tangled forest, clearing mines and booby traps while rooting out scattered resistance pockets. Between August 2nd and 4th, the Japanese made a last stand around Mount Barragata, but after several days of bombardment and infantry assaults, their defenses collapsed. The last organized Japanese resistance disintegrated. Some fled into the wilderness, others committed ritual suicide rather than surrender. On August 10, 1944, U.S. commanders officially declared the liberation of Guam complete. Once more, the American flag waved proudly over the island, marking the end of nearly 3 years of brutal Japanese occupation. In the days that followed, Lieutenant General Hideyoshi Obata, who had taken command after Takashina's death, refused to surrender. He and a handful of aides hid in a cave near Yigo village in northern Guam. On August 11, 1944, Obata sent a final message to Tokyo. Guam has fought to the last man. Then, in the spirit of the samurai, he performed seppuku, ritual suicide. Thousands of other Japanese soldiers vanished into the jungle, hiding in caves and swamps. It would take the Americans months to track down the remaining holdouts. A few surrendered, but most fought to the death or took their own lives. Remarkably, some never gave up at all, the most famous being Sergeant Shoichi Yokoi, who hid in the jungles of Guam for 27 years, finally surrendering in 1972, a haunting reminder of a war that had long since ended, but had never truly released its grasp. After 21 days of brutal combat, the Battle of Guam came to an end with a decisive victory for the United States. Yet the cost of liberation was steep. American forces suffered around 1,700 killed and over 6,000 wounded, including troops from the Marine Corps, Army, and Navy. The Japanese garrison was virtually annihilated, more than 18,000 soldiers killed, and only a few hundred taken prisoner, most of them wounded or near starvation. In addition, over 1,000 Guam civilians lost their lives during the battle and the years of harsh occupation. Despite the heavy toll, the victory at Guam carried immense strategic significance in the Pacific Campaign. It marked the first U.S. territory reclaimed from the Axis powers and gave the Americans control of vital naval and air bases. In the months that followed, Guam was rapidly transformed into a major forward command center for U.S. operations across the Pacific. Its airfields were expanded to host hundreds of B-29 Superfortress bombers, which would soon begin direct air raids on Japan itself. Meanwhile, the island's deep-water Opera Harbor became a massive logistics hub, handling thousands of tons of supplies, ammunition, and fuel for the Allied advance westward. From this strategic springboard, the United States launched its assault on the Philippines less than 6 months later, tightening the noose around Imperial Japan and pushing the Pacific War toward its inevitable end.